Today, we're going to interview Matthew Dimmick, expert on OT security. Matthew is a senior security development manager with 30 years of experience in security management, security operations, physical security, information security operation technology, cybersecurity program development and implementation, law enforcement. With extensive domestic and international experience, he has guided diverse portfolios of clients in developing best practice programs to protect their assets and achieve enterprise-level security objectives, including transportation agencies, utility providers, corporations, cultural entities, government entities, and financial institutions of regional, national, and international significance. Matt, welcome. Matt, can you provide a little background for us? How did you get into OT security?
So Bob, first off, I apologize for the length of the bio and some of the words that were thrown in there. That's one of the things that marketing folks do sometimes to make things sound really special. But at the end of the day, how did I get into OT security? It's kind of a jagged path, if you will, that, like we all have in our careers, twists and turns here and there. Most of my experience has been in the physical security side of things. I guess it was probably 17 years ago or so. One of the places that I was working had a theft of some information technology equipment, including some servers with some client data. And I got pulled in to help figure out how to deal with that. From there, I kind of danced around the physical and the IT and OT side of things, kind of on that boundary, just protecting the physical systems. And that's why OT became sort of my path, because everything is more physically connected. It's those cyber physical systems. And it's just easier to correlate the physical process that is going on and how we're protecting the physical process and the systems that are actually doing that. So that's kind of how I got there.
Gotcha. Thanks. So for the people that, a lot of people that hear about the IT security all the time. So maybe you explain a little bit about OT, operational technology, and how this cybersecurity is different than the IT cybersecurity.
Sure. So OT, or operational technology, is kind of a newer term to the game. Really, it's just talking about embedded systems. It's talking about industrial control systems or SCADA systems, DCS, distributed control systems. And they've taken that and they've lumped it all into this new lexicon of operational technology. But it's a lot of the same stuff that folks have been working with for a while. Really, when you start to look at it, it's that cyber physical connection that we really look at from an OT standpoint. So the devices that we're dealing with are manipulating physical stuff in the real world, whether that's turning a valve, turning something on, whatever, versus the software and the systems and everything else that we deal with on the IT side. To say that there's not a path where they cross, most of the folks who deal with SCADA and ICS would like to say that never happens. But we all know that that's kind of false at this point. And so we kind of tend to have to play in that space between the two. So you have IT, OT, and then you have your OT over on the other side.
Right. Was there ever a time when OT was totally separate from IT all the time? Was there a place and time, do you know, in history?
Yeah, so I guess going back a while, and also depends on the criticality of the systems, right? Criticality comes down to pretty much it's everything we do, right? Everybody talks about risk. and a huge portion of that is the criticality of the system. So things like nuclear plants, as an example, you would want to have your control systems completely isolated from other things. Even in cases like that, right? Stuxnet happened. And so even though the control systems and everything else were completely separate from, the normal operating internet, if you will, stuff can still make its way in there, which is a nice tie-in of the physical security piece of it, right? Because the way things like that make it past the air gap, or the supposed air gaps, is usually some sort of physical security issue also. So nice tie there.
Gotcha. Can you share any notable instances for people that might not be real familiar of compromised OT systems that had some big impact?
So it's interesting, right? Because depending on who you talk to, OT threats or OT hacks are either off the charts with hundreds of them happening every day, or they almost never happen. I'm kind of more in the camp of the not that they never happen, but things are much more likely to happen on a business's enterprise IT systems, and be stopped before they get to OT, or the adversaries that we're dealing with don't necessarily know how to make the physical impacts on the lower scale, right? Where I see that that's changing is kind of the involvement of the nation state actors, familiar names, right? PRC, Russia, Iran, North Korea, familiar to everybody. And things like Volt Typhoon, which we recently heard about, where the PRC was in different critical infrastructure networks and kind of living off the land and potentially doing or setting up to do potentially bad stuff. I think when you start to talk about stuff like that, and that preparation of the cyber battlefield that we're looking at, I think that's where OT gets really interesting, because it has that national security spin to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So about how is the regulatory landscape nowadays? Are they affecting OT cybersecurity in any way? Are there any key regulations that are coming into place, or that have been in place that are definitely something that people that are dealing with these type of systems need to sort of be paying attention to?
Yeah, so absolutely. I just, what was it, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration put out a statement about the water sector. So for water, as an example, even though the EPA has regulatory authority, and they have different methods for doing regulation, they tried to do more of just a cyber specific approach to things, and it was shot down in the courts. It was pushed back against by some folks in industry, overreach, things along those lines, right? Typical requirements, but they pushed it back to the states, to where the states now have to regulate cyber for all of the individual water providers. But just a couple days ago, the EPA also announced that it was going to start to increase its enforcement actions under the Clean Water Act, and start to actually hit agencies or different organizations with basically their fines and whatever else they can do, because they're supposed to provide a secure network. So we have that in water, rail and transit, pipelines, right? The TSA is now starting to put out a lot of security directives. There's also a notice of proposed rulemaking that is also associated with rail, really transportation in general, that's going to be pushing regulation harder and faster against those organizations. Obviously, in utilities, we've dealt with things like NERC SIP in the electrical utilities for a lot of years, which was basically FERC pushing some of their regulatory authority to
Right.
NERC to do those compliance audits and everything. So definitely a lot of regulation in the space, I guess, to answer your
Gotcha.
question.
Good deal. So, how do you, in risk management, how do you approach risk management in OT environments? And are there particular frameworks or methodologies that you deal with or recommend?
Sure. Risk in OT is no different than risk anywhere else, right? We can only do so much with risk. So we can avoid it, which essentially means not doing business at all. We can accept it and just say, there isn't really anything we could do. We could transfer it through things like insurance, which everybody's, cyber insurance, get it. That's the answer to everything, right? Or we could try to mitigate it, right? So now that we have that as a basis, we have to figure out actually what it is, right? And it really just comes down to that the threat. What are your vulnerabilities, right? And what's the impact of whatever's going to happen? Where OT is slightly different is there's already a lot of risk assessment around the process itself, because processes are dangerous, whether it's a chemical plant or oil and gas or transportation. There's already preliminary hazard analyses that are completed. And so what you find most common are things like a security PHA review, where you take the PHA results that were done for the process itself, and you identify how cyber can cause those particular results or those particular hazards occurring. There's also cyber PHA, which is also very similar. It's the same breakdown of we're going to look at the process and all of the elements in the process and see how cyber can affect those. From an engineering standpoint, we push a lot of things like CCE out of Idaho National Labs, which is cyber-informed, consequence-driven engineering. So if we can put something manual in place rather than something that can be hacked, they call them non-hackable safeguards, we'll usually go that route to mitigate things.
Okay, sounds good. Is there, in IT, coming more from the IT cyber world, is there usually sort of an incident response type plan or planning that's going on in OT systems?
Yeah, there is. So the TSA security directives that came out, they actually started right out of the gate with you need to have a cybersecurity incident response plan. So if you're a transit agency that falls under the security directives, if you run pipelines and you fall under the security directives, you have to have a cybersecurity coordinator. And that cybersecurity coordinator has to have a cybersecurity incident response plan. There's been some challenge in establishing some of that, right? Because the government is very heavily NIST based. And so not that that's a bad thing, right? I don't want to say that that's a bad thing. But bringing that process into folks who are typically doing operations and engineering is a process for them to learn, right? It's something to step through. You almost have to teach them how those things happen. As far as the incident response goes in those areas, I'll be completely honest, I don't even really touch it in my role because it is so specialized, right? It's so easy for someone to break something or to do something wrong and cause more damage. And so there's some companies, I won't name any, but there's some companies out there that specialize in OT security incident response or digital forensics and incident response for OT. Those are probably your best bet if you're going to go and grab somebody.
Okay, gotcha. How about future trends? Do you see any future trends that either should be happening or look like they're going to happen anytime in the future?
So obviously the easy answer is AI, right? Everything is AI.
Right.
So I'm going to throw that out there, but I'm going to let it kind of go by.
Okay.
So what I see happening, particularly in this area, is a lot more things becoming sensor driven,
Hmm.
a lot more things becoming interconnected. The horse is kind of out of the barn at this point, and it's becoming harder and harder to maintain very segmented networks for a lot of people,
Hmm.
because they want to see, or they want to have the ability to reach out and get information from the OT systems.
Right.
So for those, I see actual physical breaks of communications, whether that's out of band operated or something like that,
Hmm.
that we're going to see. The other thing is from a threat perspective. I I don't think that Volt Typhoon is the end of what we have going on with
Hmm.
PRC. I think that PRC, Russia, are definitely going to be a concern for infrastructure providers in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's why we've seen so much messaging from CISA, other
Hmm.
federal agencies, whether it's EPA, TSA, you name it,
Sure.
just hammering home that these threat actors are either in our critical infrastructure already, or if something kicks off, they're definitely going to be trying to impact our critical infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how would you describe the current threat landscape in the OT and ICS space? Is there any, and also, are there any particular industries or sectors that are more vulnerable at this time?
So definitely water, right? I would definitely
Okay,
say that the water
right.
sector has had a lot of published vulnerabilities, or a lot of talk around minor incidents that have happened. We had Muleshoe down by you in
Hmm.
Texas,
Sure.
that had the tanks overflowing, right? When you start to look at things like that, um, I think we'll probably see more of it. I think there's kind of a thing going on where certain adversaries want to demonstrate that they have a capability to reach out and touch the United States, but they don't want to
Hmm.
do it in a manner that elicits a response. And so I
Hmm.
think we'll have a lot of almost vandalism like that from
Yeah.
some of the larger nation state actors going on. Just kind of pop up a flag and say, "Hey, guess where we are," and then move
Yeah.
from there.
Right.
Obviously, ransomware is a huge deal. Again, mostly it's going to impact the IT systems, but
Hmm.
like we saw with the Colonial Pipeline, if you impact the IT systems well enough, the operational technologies almost have to stop, in order for you to
Hmm.
safely function at some point. So
Sure.
um, I think same thing as everybody else. It's going to be in
Yeah.
some of those categories.
Is there, and you may or may not want to address this, but are there some common attack methods right now that we're seeing more than others?
So so I'll say yes, right?
Okay.
But I'll preface it with saying that the majority of things that you're going to do to attack an OT system, you either, well, you have to have access to the system,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's logical or physical, um,
Mm-hmm.
and limiting that access is probably the biggest thing that we can do to
Mm-hmm.
avoid issues. Unlike IT, where attacks have to be really complex.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get into a control system and do something as simple as like an Nmap scan,
Mm-hmm.
I might disrupt the system's operations. It's not probably going to take the thing offline,
Mm-hmm.
but most of the systems aren't made to handle those types of traffic.
Right.
And
Right.
so anything like that could really be an attack on OT. And so I guess the idea is to stay as isolated as possible.
Right.
Make sure that your boundary is really strong, and then make sure that nothing's flat once you get inside of it.
Mm-hmm. On the convergence challenges, we touched a little bit about IT doesn't always stay separate from OT, unfortunately. I guess in the ideal world they might, but like you were saying, AI systems are going to be used more and more, and a lot of those AI systems run on the IT network. Are there some things that you can do to specifically help in those challenges and create closer to the air gap type system?
Yeah. So from a technical standpoint, you're probably going to be looking at things like the physical disconnects that I talked about. And I'm trying not to name product names
Right.
because
Understood.
being from an engineering firm, I have to remain agnostic.
Yeah.
But they are out there. Data diodes or unidirectional gateways are ways to maintain a boundary. They kind of work through proxy. Obviously, if you have to access stuff, you're going to look at things like privileged access management and use that Purdue model, jump box kind of style
Right.
to get to your systems. So there's stuff that we could do from a technical standpoint. Honestly, the biggest challenge with convergence, Bob, really comes down to a few things. One, it's sometimes a seeming lack of respect of the IT folks, or maybe a little bit too much ego, not to beat up on folks too much, when they're talking to the engineers that are running the operations. And then there's the more salty engineer on the other side, who's been doing things a certain way for 20 years, 30 years. And why do we need to change anything? And so a lot of and I don't really like using convergence as a term, but a lot of the challenges around that blending of the different types of security are people challenges. It's
right.
getting people to talk, getting people to communicate, and understanding each other's problems and worlds. That's where the magic happens, I think, is there.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Tell me something. Is this zero trust approach, is this being talked about very much in the OT type technology now or not?
It is. You'll hear more folks, at least in my circles, right? And my circle's decent, but it's not your circle, Bob. But you'll hear things. You'll hear it talked about a lot more in terms of micro segmentation than you will specifically zero trust. And so we're looking at where maybe you used to have 10 or 15 systems all using the same administration network to check in and kind of get their heartbeats, right? Maybe we're looking at segmenting those now, breaking up that admin network so there's not as much cross once you get into certain environments, right? So there's things along those lines. So not your classic zero trust, that everybody's talking about right now. But definitely micro segmentation, and part of that really comes down to system capabilities, right? On the OT side, there's some stuff that might only be able to have one or two passwords, and they're short, not very complex passwords. And so when we start talking about breaking it up by, every user has a unique this or an independent that or whatever, some of the systems just don't have that capability right now.
Yeah. So, would you say, we talk about a talent shortage in IT security. Do you have that sort of thing in the OT security first, and then maybe we go on from there? Is there any advice that you have for beginners looking into getting this type of field?
So, so is there a shortage? Yes, there is a shortage. There's a technical shortage of folks, right? But there's also a challenge in getting new positions opened in the OT field. And so what we saw was some of the larger OT security companies, they kind of blew up, right? They got huge investments, they got really large, they took in a bunch of talent and they trained them all, and then they had to downsize for whatever reason.
Hmm.
I
Right.
personally think it's because the OT market is extremely slow at
Mm.
adopting new technology, right? It takes us a long time to do
Sure.
that. And
Yeah.
so trying to scale and move at the speed of whatever doesn't always work, right? And so now all of those very highly trained, very capable OT security people were now released into the market. And
Hmm.
so what you'll have is a glut of those folks combined with people coming out of school
Mm.
that are competing for similar roles. And so I think
Hmm.
there's a little bit more challenge on the OT side, maybe, than on the cybersecurity side. Anybody who's in
Hmm.
cybersecurity or trying to get an entry level job is probably yelling at me right now or wanting to pull their hair. But
Yeah.
it could be a little bit worse
Hmm.
for starting out. If you have some experience in IT, if you have some experience in security, there's a lot of programs, whether it's through ISA, they have a
Hmm.
certification pathway that you can do ICS security for. Idaho National Labs through CISA
Mm.
has free
Hmm.
training,
Oh,
ICS 300, ICS
it's nice.
400, the lab that you can go to and get a really good understanding of things. And then there's a
Yeah.
few schools that are actually starting to have programs in it. Idaho
Oh,
State being one of them that has an
oh,
ICS security specific program.
gotcha.
And then just one last one to throw out is SANS. They have a master's program that
Ah, yeah.
also has ICS certifications to it.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Um, Tell you what can we do? What can individuals do as far as not only maybe helping, convince people that this is an important thing, but what can we do to protect ourselves and our families too?
So that's a good question, Bob. It's actually I mean, you've heard me plenty of times on our chats talk about the importance of individual resilience
Yes.
over just community resilience, right? And I'm a very firm believer in that. So when you start looking at what you're doing for your family, what you're doing for yourself, um, number one thing is if all of the electricity in your area went out for 24 hours, it might not be a big deal. If you extend that to 72 hours, now we're starting to talk that it's pretty inconvenient, right? And that's one disadvantage we actually have as a
Hmm.
country because our
Hmm.
population is, I won't say spoiled, but we're very used to having our utilities.
Hmm.
Um, so individual resilience comes into it where you should get maybe used to not having some of those things. Like maybe try going camping for a weekend instead
Yeah.
of
Sure.
something else, right? Um, get yourself a go bag. Put some medicine in there and rotate it out. Make sure that you have some cash on hand, right? Because
Hmm.
um, maybe the financial sector doesn't collapse like people would talk, right? Um, and you don't have your gold and silver bars or whatever, but
Hmm.
at least you have some cash where if your ATM isn't working because there's no power,
Hmm.
you can still buy some milk or some bread or some diapers for your family, right? You
Hmm.
can still make a transaction. So keep some cash. I like to
Hmm.
say, if you can, about $200 to $300 per person in your
Hmm.
household,
Hmm.
small bills, and separate it among the family members' bags, so that
Gotcha.
that way, you have that. Everybody should have a bag of their
Hmm.
own. Even
Hmm.
kids, if you have smaller kids, make them carry some stuff.
Hmm.
It's not going to hurt them, and just prepare. Right. Try
Yeah.
to prepare at least for
That
72 hours. If you can extend it a little bit more, then go ahead and do that.
gotcha. Now, your bag, is it sort of like a backpack type bag? Your
Yeah.
personal bags? Okay.
Yeah, so I have I see I'm the man of the house. So
Yeah.
I have actually two bags, right? So I have a
Oh,
med bag,
okay.
being a former EMT, right?
Ah, gotcha.
I have a med
Cool.
bag to carry with me in case somebody gets hurt or something happens.
Sure.
Standard supplies that I cycle through, a little bit more than first aid, but not much. And then I
Mm-hmm.
have my personal go bag,
Mm-hmm.
which will get me through. It'll easily get me through 72 hours, but there's
Okay.
there's different changes of clothes.
Right.
I keep
Mm-hmm.
water, and we rotate the water out. I have some freeze dried food
Mm-hmm.
that I carry along with me. Um,
Okay.
Extra pair of shoes,
Mm.
lots of socks, some
Yeah.
powder, because the last
Right.
thing you want is wet feet.
Yeah.
If you're trying to bug out, all of the standard
Sure.
stuff. A knife,
Like
but not
night.
not Crocodile Dundee, but one that's actually
like
something that we can use and
a
do a
Swiss
lot of
Army
things
knife
with.
or a Boy Scout knife or something.
Uh, a little bit of both, right? Everybody, I
Yeah.
love a spider, but that's just
Gotcha.
me.
Oh yeah. Those are good. Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Well, hey, any last words before we go? Thank you for coming on to the show today. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. No real last words. Just like I said, try to prepare yourself for bad things that might happen. It'll make it a lot easier on the responders who are out there, a lot less stressful for the linemen and the real heroes that are out there trying to keep the utilities and everything else going. If we're individually prepared and not screaming at please get stuff on now. So I guess that would
Exactly.
be my parting thought, Bob.
Thank. Hey, thank you very much, Matt. Certainly appreciate it, and I think that's some sage advice. You take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks, Bob. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.